So I'll make it easy, and I'll just make it a survey question. And even though I frankly can't see your hands because of the lights, I don't think I'll see a hand go up. How many of you in this room have flown supersonically on an aircraft in the last 20 years? Ooh, I can do this. And as I expected, fighter pilot? Oh man, there's always a fighter pilot in the room. For those of you, most of you that did not raise your hand and are not fighter pilots, that's because we do not have a viable supersonic commercial aircraft, but that was exactly what my PhD topic was when I did my PhD dissertation. And so you could say that I failed, but my point in bringing this up is that really, coming from academia, research never fails as long as it's done well and as long as it can promote and advance learning. And learning is a collective process. And so even though I wasn't able to find a viable solution for a supersonic commercial transport, we did learn a lot about the science, the technology challenges, and the business models, frankly, of what was missing. And we're still working on it, obviously. Nowadays, I'm actually working quite a bit in a little bit of a faster regime, and that is hypersonics technology. And I'm very pleased to be a senior research fellow with the Kroc Institute. And one of the experts, I guess, in hypersonics, there was my colleague who's more expert in the room. I'm not sure if he's still here, our excellent CEO of the Purdue Applied Research Institute, Mark Lewis. But nonetheless, we are in the midst of really needing to learn and learn fast in hypersonics technology. And that's just one example of a technology that's both a national security imperative, but also part of a potential very vibrant commercial activity, including the fact that we use hypersonic systems to get to space and from space. And so with that background and this idea that we need to create what I like to call a system of systems to create that learning environment, whether it's just in academia or more apropos for this panel, how do we bring together our academic expertise, the Silicon Valley mindset of innovation and learning, fast learning, as well as our DC partners and assets here so that we can really accelerate in these key technology areas. And there is no better panel to discuss this than the one presented here before you. So let's get started. So I'll briefly, again, introduce each person as I ask them a question, and I'm going to start with Tom Barton. I'll read actually a little bit of a deeper title, the co-founder and CEO of Antaris, a software as a service space tech provider. And Tom, I certainly see it in the students that come through my door at Purdue. I mean, the space age is here, especially the commercial space age. Almost all of the students that we get really want to work in this exciting market. It's about exploration, it's about commercialization, but it's also about national defense. So give us your take on this nexus in this very kind of complex situation. How can we get this unity of effort to make sure all of those mission areas are successful?
Yeah, well, I think space is a unique area where it's almost always been dual use. It originally started with organizations like NASA and the DoD funding various kinds of rocket and satellite initiatives. And that's still the case, but if you really look at where all the innovation is coming from now, it's coming from the private sector, right? It's companies like SpaceX. And increasingly in the satellite world, it's also coming from the non-traditional defense contractors. So we're moving away from the world where Lockheed Martin, built a $2 billion satellite to a world where SpaceX is creating, $1 million satellites, or a company like Planet Labs is creating satellites that cost $100,000. And so, going forward, to contextualize it a little bit on the DoD side, I mean, I do think that we are in a space race today with China. I think we are at risk of losing it. And the primary reason isn't because we're exporting too much technology and things like this. The primary reason is that we're not innovating fast enough. So I just think our primary challenge is that we have to innovate 2 to 4 times faster than we are. And the way to do that is to actually enhance collaboration in multiple ways, right? So some of that is collaboration with our allies, meaning actually relaxing export restrictions with friendly nations like not just the Five Eyes, but India and Singapore and others. It's also opening up the markets and open standards, and frankly, we actually need to completely rebuild our industrial supply chain as we move from single expensive billion-dollar geosynchronous assets to hundreds of thousands potentially of much smaller satellites that are essentially commoditized.
Yeah. As I mentioned to you, so many of our students are actually coming from overseas and wanting to work in this area. So I think it's going to come up later in our panel, but we really need to tap into that human talent as much as we can. Yes, it's all about technology, but the human talent pipelines are really central to that from beginning to end. So, Dana, you're at the Summit Group now, but you've been at the State Department, you've been in the corporate world and leadership and on boards. What is the architecture that we really need to create? What are some very tangible things in your experience that either didn't work out or things that we need to do right in terms of making this unity of effort?
Thanks, Dan, and I just want to thank everyone for sticking in here all day this late in the game. And I couldn't agree more with what you said, Tom. I think that was very spot on. We talked earlier about incentives and imperatives in this question about the architecture. And when I was in government, we had a really big incentive to protect our national security secrets, our work, everything that we said, wrote down, all of our infrastructure. It was called going to jail or losing your job or both. And no one wanted to be, corrupted by a foreign malign, intelligence agency. So we had that instilled OPSEC or operational security as part of our government culture and as part of our commitment to our country, the oath that we swore in taking that commitment. Now, for the private sector, in terms of architecture, yes, some of the, many of our labs and our academic institutions and many of our companies as government, as supplying critical tech to government are still on the hook for those things, but that's probably not the best incentive for a free capital market society. So the incentives have to be revenue. And what do I mean by that? I mean, when you try to incentivize, you have to show that this is going to be good for the bottom line. So what are the imperatives of that as we create the architecture? It's creating a culture of operational security on many levels, and it's a commitment to that security, bottom up, top down, sideways, all the way through. The government needs to know that our tech startups, not just the Lockheed Martins, but these tiny innovative tech startups are trusted tech suppliers, that they know what the risks are up front. And I'm afraid that we're not quite there yet. I think a lot of our Silicon Valley companies and even the boards and investors are not really cluing in. And I can give you a concrete example. Mm-hmm. So, I was working with a CEO of an AI company in Silicon Valley, and, looking at all the compliance needs and things that were there. They had DoD contracts, and 70% of their stuff was commercial, and that's where the revenue focus was. That's where the board focus was. And I said to the CEO, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z. You need to make these investments. And, if you don't do it, it's a business killer. Lack of compliance, lack of security is a business killer. And, even SAP was under a consent decree, and they had an army of lawyers who did export controls, and they still got caught with a third-party, tech software that found its way into Tehran, under their noses. So this can happen to anybody. He said, Dana, stop talking to me and stop talking to everyone about compliance being a business killer. Nobody wants to hear it. Now, that should be a red flag warning to a lot of people. And that was not unique, and that was not unique to that company. Moreover, the board never once asked, what is your security compliance roadmap? What are we doing in this business? They were not knowledgeable. And then on the commercial side, I was fighting, the commercial team and explaining to them that no, they couldn't outsource certain functions to people sitting in Iran or Venezuela or Russia. And they didn't understand. They pronounced Venezuela, Venezuela. How would they know these things? So unfortunately, we need to get to the place where, and this is where I'm really hoping the Kroc Institute can play a role with Silicon Valley, is from the time people are inventing stuff in their garage with 2-person team, 4-person team, that their mentors in these tech accelerators can come to us, come to you, and ask, like from the very beginning, day one, what do we need to be thinking about so that this stuff doesn't get stolen, so that as we hire people from a trusted country, we have the proper risk analysis. The fact that they're oblivious to geopolitical realities is a problem, but it's a problem we can work together to solve. And so that's where I really hope that we can do that. And if you're investors out there, please ask the questions. Please drive it into the term sheets. Okay, we're going to give you $10 million, but you have to spend $100,000 on this, on ITAR controls and on CMMC and maturity models, and make sure you're cyber secure, make sure you have training and onboarding, and that they're building the cultures of operational security from the ground up. I think this is something Kroc can do. And then on the SEC side, I really liked what Senator Young said about disclosing this, because we have so much of our Silicon Valley tech money invested in China. I get calls about it all the time, and it's a real problem.
Well, thank you very much. That was quite a bit, and quite a bit relevant to the gentleman sitting next to you, Amir, who longtime friends that you are from earlier today. Amir, again, you've lived. You're the epitome, right, of Silicon Valley. You were a tech executive at Google, and now you're on the venture capital side. So, what are the ways that, in your experience, what are some of the pain points? Either some that Dana mentioned or ones that you want to highlight, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for setting up this. I think the situation, coming from, the background that I come from, trenches in Silicon Valley, building products, building technology, and supporting customers and making business out of them. I think the situation is complicated. Situation is not one-dimensional. Despite what we might hear from time to time in the media, that there is a disconnect between, or maybe a resentment to some extent between Silicon Valley and government policies. I think to a large extent, I feel like there is a lot of appreciation and desire for government to take a proactive and constructive role in building and securing technology. I think the good example of that is all the recent conversation about AI and AI safety and how that should be framed up. I think it's a coalition between the industry leaders and the government agencies. And now we have an executive order. Hopefully this is the beginning, a first step towards a longer journey to solve that problem. So there is that desire, but I can also share some personal experiences in terms of how working with government from the commercial side, particularly from an area like Silicon Valley, things are very fast-paced and you're always sitting on the edge, could not be as easy as it should be. For example, in my previous job, I had a very specific project and mission to do, and I didn't really have to work with any particular government agency on a day-to-day basis, but out of just a lot of self-initiative. I wanted to work with DARPA on particular research projects, which was important to them, and also I could see the value of those projects in our future roadmap. And we started the conversation. But even DARPA, which is sort of like an agency that is, their job is to work with research and academia and commercial entities, the amount of overhead that working with a government institution brings to your day-to-day life is get to the point that you're asked that question by your supervisors and your executives, that is it really worth it? And I think that's the kind of like a dilemma. I think if I were to say like where are the low-hanging fruits, that I think cutting back on bureaucracy and taking a more active, proactive and constructive approach is going to be very it will be a key to a much closer collaboration between government and tech companies. And I think just it's got multiple sides and multiple dimensions, but I completely acknowledge the points that you're raising as well.
Yeah, well, thank you. And the word that I'm hearing, and we'll ask Donna a question, but I think we may want to come back to this topic of risk and how the unity that we're looking for might be a way for all of us to understand the common risk better and therefore maybe minimize it a bit. But certainly my Purdue colleague and a faculty member at Purdue who's done amazing award-winning work in semiconductors research. And if you haven't heard, Purdue University, and President Chang likes to be the first one to say this, we consider ourselves the semiconductor university, not just in research, but in industry partnerships and in workforce development in this very important tech sector. So please tell President Chang that I said that from the stage. So I don't get in trouble. But, so we've heard from our, industry partners and those that have been also in the government. Talk about how you see this unity that we're after from the academic side. And you've had a leadership role in our College of Engineering in working with our graduate students. So give us some sense of where the opportunities and maybe some of the risks are.
Yeah, thanks. So it's certainly, as you mentioned, a very exciting time to be at Purdue and in microelectronics and semiconductors. There's a lot of activity, a lot of engagement with industry and with government. We, received or are part of this Emmy Commons or Microelectronics Commons, and a lot of exciting opportunities moving forward and investments that have been happening, including in workforce development in addition to research. And I will be sure to let Mom know that was brought up. I guess from the academic perspective and thinking about my years working with the semiconductor industry, obviously this issue of unity goes far beyond that to all of the other critical sectors that are of relevance to national security and to our global economy. But I'll take the view from semiconductors because that's my particular vantage point. We've really benefited from industry engagement and from government engagement over the years, but I think with the scale of what we are trying to achieve now and with the urgency and with the changing dynamics on the global scale, there's a lot more that we need to do, and that we, through opportunities like this, can bring together the smartest minds and kind of think about how to frame that moving forward. So I'd say in terms of research success and propelling innovation, what academicians need are primarily, resources, access to technology, and engagement with industry and government early on in the process and throughout the process to ensure that we are addressing some of the most critical challenges and that we're not going down any particular rabbit hole, which from our open university vantage point and our focus on blue sky innovations, we sometimes don't get that full perspective from critical failure points or supply chain issues or all of these things. So we need to think holistically about the innovations that happen to address those challenges on a national and indeed on a global scale. So all of that, I think, is where the government and industry can come together. We do face this challenge that there's risk there in the access. In the case of semiconductors, we have worked with multiple foundries over the years in developing new functionality for microchip technology. But there's this issue of IP. There's an issue of export control or even just controlled material, and how do you deal with that in an open research environment that we're trying to foster and that we really need to protect at the university level in order to allow for those crazy ideas to come to fruition. And we need to protect that cradle of innovation at that fundamental research level. But there are everything from resources and centers and institutions that can be established at the national level, and then policies to make sure that those are safeguarded and that they are that we are thinking about access and risk that need to be put in place in order to make those successful. So putting that all together, I think working between all of these sectors is really critical.
Well, and the way you said, especially the last part, we've heard Keith Kroc talk about the foundation of the clean network and all the successes was trust, right? The partners are trusting each other. And I think that's the secret we're trying to get to. And frankly, I've seen also in my time we're trying to work with industry, if you don't have that trust and that ability to step a little bit out of your comfort zone with industry, whether it's on IP or something, I think we just need a greater culture of let's trust. Mung told us, right, the clock is a bit ticking, so we can spend another 3 years trying to negotiate an agreement, but what are some ways that we can really invigorate and build this trust network, in your opinions? Anyone can go.
If I could jump in
Sure.
on what Dana said, because this is really important. So she mentioned the word access, and we talked about risk and risk mitigation. I think if we at Kroc, as the leaders in this sort of clean tech, evangelism, if we can come up with really easy and automated, we can use technology to automate some of the pain out of the compliance and automate some of the pain out of having a baseline standard, so that when we work with a lab, when a lab in the US works with a lab in India and a lab in the Netherlands, that they're all operating from a baseline standard and they can be certified that they're using these practices and behaviors and cultures, as well as like the physical security and the insider threat programs. There has to be some sort of baseline, and I really do think we can architect that, and we can architect that without it having to be legislated upon everybody. I think if we create that out of our free will, we can start the basis for that trusted network quite quickly.
That's a good point. Tom, you do a lot of work with India. I mean, do you?
We do,
what do you
right?
feel
we're
about that?
heavily regulated, right? We don't do anything that's ITAR presently, but we do stuff that's EAR.
We can help you with that.
Okay. Because we probably will do some things that are ITAR related. And so, India is relatively friendly in the sense that, we have one of our ACCNs is 9515A, which is software that goes on spacecraft. And so for that, you need effectively an export license. And with India, you can do that in a fairly simple procedure called an STA-PCS, but you can't do it for source code. And so to do things around source code, we're going to have to go through, more hoops. And we spend a lot of money with Hogan Lovells here in DC for our export compliance work, but it's just complicated. And so my point is, I don't think we're going to stop technology transfer to China. They're going to figure stuff out. I think the issue for us as a country is we've got to innovate quicker. We actually have to get space capability on
Learn
orbit
fast.
quicker
Yep.
for military reasons. And so I'd really like to work more with India, but there are some barriers. So I'd like to figure out how to overcome the barriers to working more closely with India.
If I may,
Please.
wearing my investment hat, this topic, trusted tech, is a great investment opportunity. One reason that, to your point, compliance that we see the need for has been somewhat not so straightforward to get implemented, and there was some pushback and so on, is because for the longest period of time, there was no sort of specific rules and regulations and involvement from the government in the tech space. 10 years ago, if you wanted to design a chip, or even 5 years ago, if you wanted to design a chip, you would go to China without even thinking twice, because that's how the global economy was set up. That wasn't set up overnight, it was set up over a long period of time. So that fabric of interconnected entities that work together across the globe, now all of a sudden is going through a change because of all the reasons that we all know what I talked about. And And that creates a void. Now you have to find new places. IP is an issue. Foundries are issues, and talent is an issue. So where would you go? That's a new opportunity. A newcomer can come in, and that's an investment opportunity. So unlike similar to what Keith said earlier today, people don't like to be told what to do. There should be a value proposition. I think by putting more investment and bringing more talent and infrastructure to this area, it would attract that way. That would be compliant by construction as opposed to being forced.
So I'll add on the talent side, that is a very, very critical issue right now. Workforce development, both domestic and international, really need to be a major focus as we move forward, because these big changes have happened over a short few years, and we do indeed see this void. So I was Associate Dean for Graduate Education in the College of Engineering at Purdue for the past 4 years. And we saw over that time a steep decline, of course, in the number of Chinese graduate students that were even applying into our programs, but of course also getting in. So similarly, we have a very limited demographic diversity internationally, even though 80% of our graduate students in engineering are international students. There are not enough domestic students who are interested in higher education in STEM. And so there is an opportunity there from the government to fund fellowships, but also focus on K through 12 and in undergrad programs in STEM to create opportunities for our domestic students. I think also the messaging from the government on the importance of science and engineering that comes through to our nation. Very, very important to get people energized and thinking about these roles. And then industry has a really, really important role to play here too, because those undergrads, they are thinking about the ROI of their education. Is it worthwhile for them to go and get a higher degree in one of these fields if they need to see that there are high-paying, interesting, and engaging and stable jobs out there for them along the way? So industry engagement in undergrad programs is a fantastic opportunity. Getting mentorship and co-ops and internships for students and getting them thinking about what those next steps might be, what a career in these fields might be, is an exciting opportunity domestically. Internationally, we have a huge talent pool that's already there. We just need to change our immigration policy to allow them to stay in the country, to make it easier for them to get jobs, to transition them to citizenship perhaps earlier so that they could take on some of these ITAR or just export controlled roles and serve the country, which so many of them want to do.
If I could jump in on that real quick.
Please, quickly. Yep.
Because I'm invested into a quantum computing company. So when you talk about microelectrics being a small pool of talent internationally and nationally, go to quantum and then it's like a handful of people. But one thing I would say is that everyone in this room has a voice. Your companies have a voice. You really, you were mentioning, Dana, about, immigration laws and this and that. Well, that's in the hands of our representatives and our, legislature. So we really need to use our voices and our government affairs teams. If you don't have one, get one, or just go up yourself. But we need to do the advocacy because we as industry or as academia, we have needs, and those needs have to be balanced in the national security space. And so I think we are all empowered here to take some kind of action to ask for those things. So please don't be shy. Look up your elected representatives and get your voices heard.
So I'm always thinking hypersonics, of course, which means speed. So I'm going to ask each of you in one breath or less, in one sentence or less, as we've about run out of time. To that point, give us that one sentence, that one idea that you want these people to leave the room from in terms of action that they could take or that you would like the community to take. Sorry, Tom, got to go first.
Okay, reduction of regulation, easier ways of collaborating with trusted international partners.
Thank you.
Know your risks and know your adversaries.
Proactive, constructive collaboration between government and industry.
Investment in research and in the next generation of scientists and engineers.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Let's thank the panel.